Morning I flew to Portland, I brought a lemon pound cake. That probably sounds like a strange detail to lead with, but it matters. I'd been up since 4 in the morning, wrapped it in foil while it was still warm, tucked it carefully into my carry-on between a change of clothes and the birthday card I'd picked out for my granddaughter. Iris was turning 7. 7 years old, and I hadn't seen her in 8 months. I kept thinking about that number on the drive to the airport. 8 months. I'd missed Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, her first day of second grade. I told myself this visit would make up for some of that. My son had called me 3 weeks before. "Mom, Iris is having a little birthday party. Just neighbors and a few of Meredith's friends. You should come. Should come. Not, please come. Not, we want you here. Should come." I noticed that, the way you notice a small draft from a window you thought was closed. But I pushed it aside. He was busy. He didn't always choose his words carefully. That was nothing new. I booked the flight that same afternoon, round trip, because I didn't want to assume they'd want me to stay more than a few days. $340, which wasn't nothing on my Social Security and the small pension from 31 years of working in hospital administration. But Iris was turning 7, and I had 8 months to make up for. The Portland airport was crowded for a Thursday. My son was waiting at baggage claim, which surprised me. I'd expected a text saying to take a rideshare. He looked good. Taller somehow, which doesn't make sense for a man in his late 30s, but he'd been going to the gym and it changed his posture. He gave me a quick hug, the kind where both parties are already leaning away before it's finished. "Good flight?" he asked. "Long," I said, "but fine." "Where's Meredith?" "Home, getting the house ready." I nodded. That made sense. I asked about Iris. "She's at school. Gets out at 3. He grabbed my suitcase before I could reach it, which I appreciated. He was always good about things like that, the physical courtesies. It was the other kind that sometimes slipped. We drove through neighborhoods I didn't recognize. They moved to this house 14 months ago, and I'd never seen it in person. Only photos Meredith posted sometimes. Always of the kitchen or the backyard, never of the whole street. The neighborhood was one of those newer developments where every house looks almost identical but not quite, like the builder tried to suggest individuality without committing to it. Large lots, 2 garages, the kind of street where the lawns are all immaculate because there's an HOA with actual teeth. I watched it go by and thought, this is a neighborhood where appearances matter. My son pulled into a driveway and I looked at the house. It was beautiful, honestly. 2 stories, cream-color siding, navy shutters, a big tree in the front yard that must have been planted years before the development went in. It was the only thing on the block that looked like it had a history. "It's lovely," I said, and I meant it. He carried my bag to the door. Meredith opened it before we reached the steps. My daughter-in-law is one of those women who is always perfectly put together in a way that makes you feel like you've forgotten something. She had on pressed linen pants and a blouse, her hair blown out, a smile that arrived exactly on time. We'd always been cordial. That's the most accurate word I have for it. Cordial. Like 2 countries that aren't at war. "Vivian," she said. "No, wait. I'm getting ahead of myself." She used my name. Let me just say she used my name. And there was warmth in her voice that I'd learned over the years was not the same thing as warmth. She showed me to the guest room, which was on the first floor near the laundry room. Small, but clean. A good pillow. I told her it was perfect because it was enough and I didn't need more than enough. The house itself was stunning. I don't say that grudgingly. Whoever decorated it had real taste, or real money for someone with taste, which amounts to the same thing. High ceilings, white oak floors, an island in the kitchen, the size of a small boat. I set my lemon pound cake on that island, and Meredith looked at it the way you look at something someone has left in the wrong room. "Oh, how sweet," she said. "I'll put this somewhere." I didn't ask where. The birthday party was the next afternoon. All day Meredith was busy. Decorators came in the morning, actual decorators, 2 young women with a van full of balloon arrangements and a banner that cost more than my first month's rent back in 1987. My son disappeared to pick up the custom cake. I offered to help and was told everything was handled, which is a polite way of saying you're not needed. I played with Iris when she got home from school. That was the best hour of the whole trip. Just the two of us at the kitchen table with her colored pencils, drawing horses because she was in a horse phase. She drew me one and signed it with big loopy letters. I folded it and put it in my purse, and it's still there right now. Slightly crumpled, still the best thing I brought home. Around 5, people started arriving. Meredith's friends from the neighborhood association, from Iris's class, from wherever. Their husbands. The kids were released into the backyard. The adults clustered in the kitchen and the living room. My son found me by the window. He leaned in close and his voice was very quiet. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Meredith's people. Some of them don't know about all the family stuff. Just, while you're talking to people, can you maybe just say you're an old family friend? Just for tonight?" I looked at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the room. "An old family friend," I repeated. It's easier. There's some complicated dynamics with her family, and I don't want to get into explanations tonight. I want to tell you that I said something, that I asked him to clarify what exactly he meant, that I reminded him I'd flown 2,600 miles to watch his daughter blow out her birthday candles, and that I'd written the check that made it possible for him to buy this house in the first place. But I didn't. I stood there by the window and I said, "Okay." Just like that. "Okay." It's the thing I've turned over the most in the months since. Why did I say okay? I think it was because I didn't want to ruin Iris's party. I think it was because some part of me still believed my son was a reasonable person who would come to me later and apologize and explain. I think it was because I was standing in a room full of strangers and I didn't know how to become a scene. So I spent the next 3 hours as an old family friend. I watched Iris open presents. I watched Meredith receive compliments on the house, the decorations, the cake, which was shaped like a horse and covered in fondant flowers. I watched my son stand next to his wife with his arm around her and laugh at things her friends said. One of the neighbors asked me how I knew the family, and I said I'd known them for years, which was true, and that I'd watched Iris grow up, which was also true, and I smiled while I said it. Nobody asked follow-up questions. That's what I remember. Not a single person found it curious enough to press. It was the most invisible I'd ever been in a room. I didn't sleep well that night. The guest room was quiet and the pillow was fine, but I kept waking up and staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what had just happened. I'm 67 years old. I raised my son alone after his father left when the boy was 9. I worked every year he was growing up. First as a medical billing clerk, then as an office manager, then working my way up to department head. I skipped vacations. I drove a car with 190,000 miles on it until it cost more to repair than replace. When my son met Meredith and they decided to buy a house in Portland, I had $87,000 in savings. Not life-changing money, but decades of not spending what I didn't have to spend. I gave them $60,000 for the down payment. Not a loan, a gift. Because I wanted him to have the foundation I'd never had. Because I wanted Iris to grow up with a backyard and a good school district. I thought about that $60,000 while I stared at the ceiling. The next day was Saturday. My son said they had a brunch to get to. Meredith's parents were in town, staying at a hotel nearby. He said it in a way that made clear the invitation did not extend to me. "You're welcome to explore the neighborhood," he said. "There's a coffee place about half a mile down on Oak Street." I said that sounded nice. I said it with a voice that didn't shake. After they left, I sat at that big kitchen island with a cup of coffee I made myself, and I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the drive from the airport, how he'd carry my bag. I thought about Iris and her horse drawing. I thought about what it means to raise a child and whether the job is ever finished or whether it just changes shape, becomes something you have to keep doing in new ways until one of you runs out of time. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called my daughter. I should explain, my son and my daughter aren't close. She lives in Tucson. She'd warned me, more than once, about what she called the pattern. I'd defended my son every time, but I called her from that kitchen, sitting on one of the bar stools that cost more than my first car, and I told her what had happened. She listened the whole way through. When I was done, she said, very quietly, "Mom, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm going to do something." I've always believed that the best way to handle a situation you can't control is to get very, very clear about the things you can. So I spent Saturday afternoon being clear. I pulled out my phone and opened the email folder where I keep important documents, scanned copies of things that matter. The gift letter I'd signed when we transferred the $60,000, the tax documentation, the note my son had written me, handwritten, 2 pages long, after we finalized the transfer, telling me what this meant to him, how he'd never forget it, how he planned to pay it back in small ways for the rest of his life. I read that note twice. I also thought about the conversation we needed to have. Not a scene, not a confrontation in front of his wife's family. Something real, just between the two of us. That evening when they got back from brunch, I asked my son if we could talk. Just us. He looked uncomfortable, but he said yes. We sat in the backyard. The sun was going down, and the yard was beautiful. A stone patio, a raised vegetable garden along the fence, a small playhouse my son had built for Iris. I waited until he'd gotten settled. Then I said, "I need you to help me understand something. When you asked me to pretend I wasn't your mother at the party, what were you trying to protect?" He started with explanations. There were complicated dynamics with Meredith's family. Her parents had never fully accepted that she'd married someone without a graduate degree. He built a version of their life in this neighborhood that he was proud of, and my showing up reminded people of where he came from. I let him finish. Then I said, "I am where you came from." Not angry, not loud. I said it the way you state a fact, like the temperature or the name of the street. He didn't say anything for a moment. I said, "I'm going home tomorrow. I've changed my flight. But before I go, I want you to hear me clearly. I don't need to be the center of anything. I don't need to be introduced with fanfare. But I will not be invisible in my granddaughter's life. And I will not pretend to anyone that I'm not your mother." He started to respond, and I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. The $60,000 I gave you, I want you to know, I've never once thought of that as leverage. It was a gift, and it still is. But I want you to understand what it cost me to save that money, and I want you to think about what it says that you can't acknowledge me in this house." The backyard was very quiet. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking. My son is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that, because this story could make him sound like one, and the truth is more complicated. He is a man who married someone whose approval he values too much, and who has spent years quietly making himself into someone that person finds acceptable. I know where that impulse comes from. I watched him learn it when he was 9 years old, and trying to make himself acceptable to his father, who was leaving. The damage from that man runs long. But understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you accept the hurt. He didn't apologize that night. Not really. He said he was sorry I felt that way, which is a different thing entirely, and I told him so. He seemed surprised that I could see the difference. I've been seeing the difference between those two phrases for 67 years. I am not going to miss it now. I left Sunday morning. My son drove me to the airport, mostly quiet. When we got to departures, he carried my bag to the curb, which he did. He always does the physical courtesies. He hugged me goodbye, and this time the hug was longer. I don't know what that meant. On the flight home, I sat in the window seat and watched Portland shrink beneath the clouds, and I didn't cry, which surprised me. I thought I would. I think I was too tired to cry, or too clear. The crying came later, at home, in my own kitchen, when I unpacked my carry-on and found the foil that had wrapped the lemon pound cake. The pan was still in there. Meredith hadn't sent it back with anything in it. That detail got me, somehow. The empty pan. The months after that trip were quiet between me and my son. Not silent. He called every few weeks. We talked about Iris, about the weather, about nothing that mattered. The thing that had happened in the backyard seemed to exist in a separate space from our regular phone calls, like we'd agreed without discussing it to keep the two things apart. But something had shifted in me. Quietly, without announcement. I stopped volunteering. I stopped sending the extra checks at Christmas time for whatever project was happening. I started spending that money on things I'd always put off. A trip to see my college roommate in Savannah, a class at the community center, a new set of kitchen knives. Small things, but mine. And I talked to my daughter more. She came to visit in the spring. We sat on my back porch and drank iced tea, and she said, "You seem different." "Different how?" "Lighter," she said. I thought about that for a long time. Lighter. I decided it was because I'd put something down. I'd set down the idea that my job was to make myself small enough to fit into whatever space I was given. I'd carried that idea for decades, as a single mother, as a hospital employee, as a mother-in-law, and I hadn't realized how heavy it was until I wasn't carrying it anymore. The conversation I'm going to tell you about now happened 6 months after the birthday party. My son called on a weeknight. He talked around things for a while. Work, Iris's school, something about the vegetable garden, and then, out of nowhere, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said." In the backyard. I waited. I don't think I've been treating you the way I should." He stopped. Started again. "Meredith and I have been going to therapy. Her idea, actually." He sounded almost surprised by that, and some things have come up. I didn't say anything. I've learned that silence, at the right moment, is the best invitation. "I think I've been ashamed," he said. "Not of you. I want to be clear about that. Not of you. But I don't know how to say this, of needing you as much as I did. When I was growing up, it felt weak, and Meredith's family has this thing about self-sufficiency, where everything has to look like it was earned without help. And I think I was trying to make our life look like that." I said, "I know. I shouldn't have asked you to do that." "At the party." "No," I said. "You shouldn't have. I'm sorry, Mom." Not, "I'm sorry you felt that way." Just, "I'm sorry, Mom." Full stop. I sat with that for a moment. I let it land. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means more than you know." We talked for another hour. It wasn't everything resolved. That's not how real things work. But it was honest. It was two people trying, which is usually the best you can hope for. Iris came to visit me in October, just her, on her first ever solo plane trip. My son put her on the plane in Portland, and I met her at the gate in Denver. And she walked toward me with her little backpack and her serious face and her horse sticker collection. And she said, "Grandma, I've been practicing my braiding. Can I practice on you?" I told her she could braid my hair until her arms fell off if she wanted. We spent 3 days baking and watching old movies and walking to the park down the street. She braided my hair every night. I still have the photo my daughter took when she video called, me and Iris at the kitchen table. Iris's tongue stuck out in concentration, my hair in about 12 uneven sections. I kept the horse drawing she made me at the birthday party. I had it framed. It hangs in my hallway now, next to a photo from my son's college graduation, back when I was still his mother in every room. I am his mother in every room now. That's not a declaration. It's just a fact. The way the temperature is a fact. The way the name of the street is a fact. I stated it once, quietly, in a backyard in Portland, and eventually it stuck. I've thought a lot about what made that backyard conversation possible. Not easy. Possible. Because there's a difference. Easy would have been if my son had come to me first, apologized before I had to say a word, recognized on his own what he'd done. That didn't happen. What happened instead was that I had to get quiet enough inside myself to say something true out loud, without anger, without an audience, without any guarantee that it would land. That's not something I knew how to do at 40. I'm not sure I knew how to do it at 50. It took a long time and a lot of smaller moments I don't talk about to understand that speaking clearly is its own kind of strength, and that staying silent to keep the peace is sometimes just another word for disappearing. What I've come to believe is this: the way we treat the people who have the least power to retaliate tells everything about who we are. My son, when he asked me to become invisible at that party, wasn't thinking about power. He was thinking about appearances. But the effect was the same. I was standing in a house I helped buy, watching my granddaughter blow out her candles, and I wasn't allowed to be her grandmother in that room. That's not a small thing, no matter how quietly it happened. And here's what I've noticed about choices like that: they don't stay contained. When you ask someone to make themselves smaller for your comfort, the smallness spreads. My son had been making himself smaller for years, for his wife's family, for the neighborhood, for the version of himself he was trying to project. He'd gotten so practiced at it that he'd started asking the people who loved him to do it too. That's how it works. The habits we build to protect ourselves have a way of reaching outward until they start costing other people something. Iris didn't know any of that, of course. She just knew her grandma came for her birthday and drew horses with her and made a cake. Children have a way of cutting through to what's real. I think about her braiding my hair in my kitchen in October, and I think, this is what I was protecting. Not my pride, not my feelings about the party. The right to be fully present in her life, without apology, without performance. What I want anyone to take from this is simpler than it might sound. You are allowed to state the truth about who you are, not aggressively, not as a demand, just as a fact. I am his mother. That is not a problem to be managed. That is not an inconvenience to be hidden. It is simply what's true, and true things have a way of outlasting everything you build on top of them. My son is doing the work now. I believe that. And I hope that Iris will grow up in a home where people say what they mean and own what they owe to each other. That would be worth more than anything I could ever write a check for.